Hi, folks. It's good to see you, although I can't see you, obviously, but it's good that you've tuned in just to watch this short video on a topic that I think interests all of us because it's part of the human condition, really. And for some of us, it's something that accompanies us throughout life, and others, it's a response to events. And I should say at the very outset, this talking about grudges and what it's like to bear a grudge. It's not meant to be judgmental, so it's not that people that don't hold grudges are fantastic and should be held up, and the rest of us are not quite that good. It's a very subjective issue, but it's important because it impacts on the way that we build and repair or leave relationships, if you like. And that can be right across the board. It can be a work issue that's causing you to hold a grudge against someone in that workplace. It can be within families. Typically, families have often have breakups and issues there where people fall out, and those grudges are definitely there, and they can continue for years and years and years. But also, they can be resolved. So I remember when I was working as a minister, I did a lot of work with people who were at the end of their lives, and many who were in hospital and who were experiencing life-changing circumstances, illnesses. I remember one instance, there was a lady there who was in her late 80s, and her two daughters had split over an issue. Doesn't really matter what it was, but they had split and they had been not talking, if you like, for 20 plus years. And they were both very bitter towards each other. But of course, their mum at that point in time, she was coming towards the end of her life, and she wanted to see some form of reconciliation if that could indeed happen. And it did in that case. But afterwards, I don't know what happened, but I'm guessing that there was probably quite a bit of work to do to repair that fractured relationship, because there's a lot at stake, isn't there, when we think about those kind of relationships. And we all know of instances, we all have instances in our own families, extended families, where there's been conflict and people have really struggled with that. So bearing a grudge, whatever that looks like, is something that resonates with us when we talk about that. And that's why I thought it'd be interesting just to do a short series on that particular topic and to see what comes out of that. So first of all, I think it's really important to get the definitions right. So the definition of a grudge, a noun, in the Oxford Dictionary, used to be when I was a kid, it was an actual thing, but it still is an actual thing, but it's online. Anyway, describes a grudge as a persistent feeling of ill will or resentment resulting from past insult or injury. So this is something that's happened in the past, okay? But that's not defined. It could have happened yesterday. It could have happened 10 minutes ago. It could have happened 10 years ago, 20, 30, 40 years ago. It could have, and that's the thing. There's no time limit on it. But it's that feeling of ill will or resentment. So there's a resentment towards that person's behavior or what they've done or said. It can be just about anything. Then there's that sense of resentment, which isn't a nice feeling, to resent someone or to resent their actions. Those things are tough. Interestingly, when we think about bearing a grudge, there are lots of different things that come into that. And that's what I was seeing from when I posted on social media, just to get people's feedback on, what bearing a grudge meant for them. And it's really interesting. And I'm going to look at those things in the next installment of this series, because different people have different viewpoints. Different people have different definitions. Some people bear the grudge and they want to resolve that. Other people would say, well, that person's, not worth me not carrying this resentment for. And I think those positions are equally valid. It's how you deal with that. So bearing a grudge, if that is causing you significant amounts of emotional pain, and it's a very difficult thing for you to cope with, then there are ways that we can look at bearing a grudge and working through that. But if you have that feeling and you want that feeling to be there because, say, for example, it spurs you on, it keeps you going. If there's a conflict, then you want to fight back. So bearing a grudge might have that advantage depending on your personality. So you can see that there's a lot of things that are happening there beneath the surface. And then we have things that come in on the top of that. Say forgiveness is one. How do we forgive? Do we need to forgive? All of those issues. That's different to holding a grudge, although there are elements of crossover there. And again, that's something I want to look at. I suppose as a personal disclaimer, I would have to say that I've never held a grudge. As far as I'm aware, I mean, it might have been when I was in school I did. In fact, I could probably, yeah, I'm sure I did at some points. But it doesn't come naturally to me. And that's another thing I think that we need to discuss. So some personality types, they don't feel that sense of persistent feeling of ill will. That doesn't mean to say that at times there might be a certain anger there or a certain resentment to how things are, but that quickly dissipates. And so those differences, I think I want to talk about. Overarching, though, is because I'm a logotherapist and existential analyst, I often refer back to the founder of that school of psychotherapy, Viktor Frankl, and he said this. He said, "I do not forget any good deed done to me, but I do not carry a grudge for a bad one." Now, you might say, well, that's all right for him. And I suppose there's an element of that. But bearing in mind that Frankl was a Holocaust survivor, so he went through all of that, his family were wiped out. Just the absolute, the horrendous nature of what he went through. And he was talking about that as well when he said, "I do not carry a grudge for a bad act." And that's pretty spectacular. In fact, it's very spectacular, if that's the right way of expressing that. So not having a grudge, carrying a grudge against, what had happened to him, I think is something that we look towards. Not many of us can emulate that, I think, for lots of different reasons. So this is a big topic, but it's really important. We think about it quite often, I'm sure, and sometimes we don't think about it until we have to look to resolve the particular issues that are underlying there. So that example that I gave you about that lady and her two daughters, what focused their minds was the fact that their mum was dying and their mum wanted some form of reconciliation. And part of that reconciliation was dealing with the issue of the resentment that was there, because that can cut really deep. Again, that's something we'll talk about. And we'll look at ways that we can work our way around resentment and the grudge. And we can look at ways of processing that. So moving beyond that, if indeed that is part of what people want to do. Okay. And again, no judgment. And again, if in social media you can, I'll send another message out really just to see if anyone else has got any other perspectives on that, because there's lots of different things that are coming in that I think are really useful. Okay. So thanks very much for listening to me. And I hope you found that relatively useful. Gives the context for the wider debate. And again, I look forward to talking to you in the next week. So take care.